broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 98 Boston Street in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. I realize these broadcasts are attracting people from around the country. Please, if your business or visits take you to Providence or anywhere in Rhode Island, Boston area, please feel free to check in with the coalition. Come on board, say hi. The door is open to all of you. Providence is a toddling town, kind of a gangster city, a lot of fun. And there, as I like to say to my friends, there are probably more ways to sin in Rhode Island than just about, well, anywhere. I think at this point, we'll even take Vegas on. So it's a great city, a restaurant city, a university town, a whole lot of fun. Joining me for the first time on our new platform, she was a regular participant on what we like to call Coalition Radio 1.0, when we were an analog-only, analog-only radio AM FM station, is Bella Robinson. Bella is known nationally, and I would say somewhat internationally, as a leading activist in civil and human rights for individuals who work in the sex industry. As we always like to preface, the words I hate hearing are the quote-unquote victimless crime argument. First of all, in a consensual, monetary-based sexual relationship, there is no victim. There simply isn't. These are two adults consenting, enjoying each other's company, and there should certainly be no crime attached to that. We've waxed on poetically, I think, over the last few months, actually in the entire existence of the Coalition Radio, on the notion that prohibition is always and will always be a failure. In the situation we find ourselves in right now, the passage of FOSTA/SESTA, which most feel will actually be signed by President Trump, will usher in a new dangerous era where simple communication, a First Amendment right between adults, will be scrutinized with the risk of criminality attached to it. Entire platforms have been shut down over the last few weeks, which actually inured to the sex industry a degree of safety for its participants. That is quickly evaporating. The analogy I often draw, not my guess, but that I often draw, is that as a society, we have grown to accept the woman's right to control her own body. As a result, Roe v. Wade brought into federal law the notion of abortion rights. Again, because a woman has a right to control her own body. The notion now that some of the same poobahs who at least give lip service to women's rights on a federal level and sometimes on a state level would then turn around and say, you've got the right to your own body, except when we determine that it's an act of consensual sexual nature that we don't like, and therefore we will eliminate that control, to me is disgusting. And the notion that they would knowingly, because certainly the individuals in the sex worker rights community have spent literally years, not just in the last few months, but years, attempting to educate the Solons, the wise men, and often only men, who govern this country, the notion that they could act in such an arbitrary, capricious, mean-spirited, damaging, cynical, undereducated, and quite frankly dangerous way is antithetical to everything that this country is supposed to stand for, and quite frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves. Now, it's interesting to note, again as a sideline, that one of the authors of this, I hate to even dignify it with the term legislation, FOSTA, was actually Carolyn Maloney, who again purports, I believe she's a Long Island congresswoman, who purports to be an advocate for women's rights. Well, it would appear that the only women's rights she advocates for are women just like her. And it's the opinion of this show that if folks are willing to engage in whatever legitimate political activity they can, to engage and send a clear signal to Ms. Maloney, and when the coalition will publish links to her Twitter, although quite frankly, the sex worker community has done one hell of a great job doing what I call a shock and awe play on her Twitter feed over the last week or so, calling her out as righteously as they should, all right, then we will do everything we can to make her understand that what she has done is wrong. She has put men and women in harm's way, and quite frankly, is despicable. But again, that's the opinion of the show. So with that as a lead-in, Bella, welcome back to the coalition.
Thank you, Pat. It's good to be back. I'm glad to see you're upgraded to video now. And I want to take you back to before FOSTA, before I talk about the conference.
Mhm.
And I want people to understand that in most states, prostitution itself is just a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
But since around 2000, when the trafficking hysteria started to, form this modern day slavery global narrative, they started creating laws that said if two workers work together and share space, share clients, that they could be charged with pandering and promoting, which are felonies. So we can understand already how that would make workers unsafer, because obviously it would be safer to work with someone nearby in case something went wrong. So what I've chosen to do, because I know I'm under even more scrutiny as an activist of Coyote, I choose to work alone. I don't. Coyote does not teach people how to do sex work. We do not facilitate. We're not third-party support groups. We're simply there to promote the health and safety of sex workers and help support sex workers that are in crisis. So going back to this narrative, when we think about 30 years ago, it wasn't a lot of women hooking up for casual sex. And fast forward to 2018, we live in a hookup culture where you go on Tinder, hook up in Dunkin' Donuts with a stranger an hour later, and have free sex. And I think every woman, when they're young, especially when you're teens and you're told men are only after one thing, and you don't listen to the adults, at some point you're either kind of lied or tricked or screwed over by a guy. And that life experience allows you to not be so gullible next time. And I'm not saying the same thing can't happen to men. There's a lot of women that use men that they know they're not interested to. So this isn't just a gender thing, but it's about letting people get experience and think about why is we're not worried about people that are exploited for free sex, right?
Mhm.
And when we look at undocumented workers on farm and garment institution, domestic servitude, a lot of them are sexually abused and raped, and no one wants to talk about that. So around 2000, like I said, they started to frame this global thing called modern day slavery.
Mhm.
And they went around the world and they worked with people who worked with women in garment factories and people who wanted to stop child slavery in the gold mines in Africa. And they got them all on board that we're going to do this global thing called modern day slavery. And everyone joined up. And then it all became about sex trafficking. 80% of all human trafficking takes place outside the sex industry, but all the attention and resources are focused on sex. Now, just recently, the other day, here in Rhode Island, we had a labor trafficking case. There was an arrest. And if you notice, they didn't call it human trafficking or modern day slavery then. They called it labor trafficking. So there is a lot of bad myths out there, and they use these fake stats to solicit funding from legislatures
Mhm.
and also on the heartstring of Americans to get donation. And one of the most damning one was the average age of entry into prostitution was just 13 or 14. Well, in 2015, I confronted Kathleen Chong, who is the co-founder of Halal Project. And they updated their website to reflect that they think it's the average age is 19 based on a sample of just 123 people. So we knew that the anti-prostitution party is not going to go do any factual research for us in our benefit. They only want to talk to people with sad stories and things like that. They don't want to shut down anyone that's had a good experience. So over the summer of 2017, Coyote and SWAT Behind Bars partnered with some Brown University students, and we rolled out a 145 question survey. We got over 1,500 U.S. sex workers to participate. And we found out the average age entry was 22.
Wow.
And we found out only 40% were heterosexual, that 82% were white cis women, that only 3% felt that they had been trafficked at the current time, and 6% felt that they had been exploited at some time, but had gotten themselves out of their situation and gone on to do independent work. So I will admit there's all kinds of different levels of empowerment in the sex industry. You have street-based workers, some massage places treat the workers good. I think the legalized setup in the Nevada brothels is legalized exploitation because you're going to pay for all those expenses and permits and turn over half your money. So I want to back up to the week before FOSTA passed the Senate. It was a great week. I had the opportunity to attend and present at a conference at Brown University through the Center for Slavery and Justice. And the conference was called Whitewashing Abolition, Race Displacement and Combating Human Trafficking. And, we talked a lot about how insulting it is to label sex trafficking or labor trafficking as modern day slavery. It kind of whitewashes our history of slavery. And then this also has a lot to do with borders and undocumented people and stigmatizing Asian women and teaching the public to be private vigilantes who will, target Asian women at airport thinking they're trafficking victim. It's a form of racial profiling. But the conference was really awesome. We had 4 sex workers from Unpower from Thailand. We had 2 sex workers from Canada, Butterfly, who work on supporting migrant sex workers. We had Rachel West of US Pros from California and a member of the English Prostitution Collective. And the panel was actually really fabulous. We talked a lot about race, displacement, the history of slavery, a lot of immigration laws. And so by the time it was my turn to speak at the end, they'd already outlined the problem and I could go into what the solutions are. So I'll point out this too. Well, while these people claim they care about the children, about victims, what we have found is the U.S. is spending over $700 million a year funding trafficking NGOs, and all they need to do to get the money is create awareness about trafficking. They don't have to provide anyone with anything. Now, could you imagine if we could collect funding to create awareness about starving kids in Haiti and we didn't have to send food? So what this situation really is law enforcement, the prosecutors, will tell someone that's being detained in a prostitution sting that if they won't cooperate, say they're forced, that they're going to put their name in the paper and their picture and everyone's going to know. And if you've not been arrested and your family doesn't know you're doing sex work, that's a real big deal to you. Now, they also insist that you hook up with your local trafficking NGO, which pretty much grooms you, because I've heard these same stories. I was kidnapped. Well, first you said he was your boyfriend, now you say he was your pimp, now you said he raped you, now you said 30 men raped you, and then when you have a conversation, they never told anybody no, but now they want to claim it was rape. Right. I can attest that the average client is not going to walk into a hotel room or a private place and engage in a sexual contact with someone who acts like they're scared and not willing. They want us to open the door and be all sexy and, hi, honey, how are you? Mm-hmm. But they want to frame this so the public will think that our clients are all sexual deviants looking for 13-year-old girls. And the ironic part is our clients are military men, politicians, Secret Service, NSA workers, professors from university, people that run hospitals in our government, people that bag groceries at Stop and Shop. They're men of all walks of life. When we think about criminalization, it's been shown that criminalization is what fuels sex trafficking. Because if a lot of it is a gray area in domestic, if you have a roommate or a partner and you get an argument and they say, well, I'm going to call the cops and tell them you're a prostitute and you're going to get evicted, DCYF is going to come take your kids. Wow, that just gave someone a lot of power over you, right? And it makes more sense to allow, if we decriminalize and we allow people to come forward and tell who's trying to rape, rob, and exploit. Mm-hmm. I've also read numerous prosecutors in articles where they said, like I think the last one was Oregon or Wisconsin, where the prosecutor said, we've only had 5 sex trafficking cases this year because we plead them down to pandering or promoting because we can't prove forced coercion and fraud because the women won't cooperate. They just don't see themselves as victims. Now, prior to the internet, things were different. Sex workers worked the street for massage parlors or for escort agencies on the yellow pages, which they had to have their money to. So back then, we worked for other people. Since the internet, most of us work for ourselves. A lot of sex workers, especially who travel, might hire someone to answer their phones, screen their clients, book their airline ticket, Some sex workers that do alcohols might hire a driver to drive them to an appointment. Many sex workers have a safe buddy, so I can call and say, hey, I left the appointment and I'm okay, and someone knows where I am.
Mhm.
These are all now, we call them third-party support staff, but the government is calling these pimps and traffickers.
Right.
Okay, so there was actually another law, I think it was called HR 1652, that was also passed after FOSTA. And this bill claims that it wants to combat, human trafficking. And it basically says that if you'll snitch on someone and they can get an arrest or a conviction, the government can pay you cash.
Oh,
So if
God.
you, well, think about how,
Right.
they hate Trump, that the Trump haters, when like they think someone's undocumented, they're going to be calling ICE and thinking they're going to get a payday. But I want to bring back to Rhode Island. In 2016, Rhode Island police got an award for their kindness and community policing. And they highlighted shutting down 15 Asian massage parlors, which they claimed was a sex trafficking ring.
Mhm.
We found out these were small groups of women that migrated in their 40s or 50s, no young girls,
Right.
and they knew exactly what kind of work they would do when they were here. To our knowledge, they were deported. It's very hard to find out what happened to them once they're picked up, because you can't just call the detention center and say, is Jane Doe there? It's not like calling the county jail or a hospital. Once ICE gets you, you kind of just disappear and no one really knows what happened, especially if you don't know their names. So last year we had Vermont farm workers come down. They're undocumented workers. They had a project campaign called Milk for Dignity.
Right.
Because if they're not paid a fair wage, they can't go to the labor board and file a complaint like we can, because they're not citizens.
Mhm.
So they were trying to shame Ben and Jerry's and other places to agreeing to sign a pledge that they would buy their milk products from farms that treated their workers decently. And I asked the man, well, do you think any of this trafficking legislation helps protect undocumented workers from being exploited? And he says, well, if you report trafficking, exploitation, ICE shows up at the farm. So we can see these laws don't protect the undocumented. They don't protect the women. Now, there's also another factor in here. We've dealt with, Alex would swap behind bars and me have both dealt with a lot of people that were in that gray area where they had like an abusive boyfriend that was threatening them and maybe taking their money, but they had already done sex work willingly. They just got in a bad situation. And once the trafficking NGO gets a hold of them, they lie to them and tell them about all these great things. They're going to get them housing and medical, and they're going to get them a job, and everything is going to be great. And then they say, we want you to come to our fundraiser and tell everyone your story. And of course, they groom them to talk about being raped by the pimp and the 30 men. And I call it putting a blue dress on. And I tell my sad story, and they whisk the microphone away to tell everyone about their fundraising. And then they don't even want to give me gas money to get home. And none of those services appear.
Right.
So there is a website called Rape That Rescue. If people have been victims of state-sponsored rape, violence, which we consider raids and rescues, we want you to document those experiences, because if there's a nonprofit that did something helpful to you, we want to know, and we also want to document these abuses.
Right.
I also want to point out that law enforcement all over the country is allowed to engage in sex acts with women during vice stings, then arrest them for prostitution, and then steal their earnings. We call it state-sponsored rape and wage theft. Because in what world do we think it doesn't matter? I mean, what if it's a 17-year-old trafficking victim and they're having sex with them or engaging in some kind of sexual conduct? In more recent years, when we were all on the yellow page pretending that we were selling time and companionship,
Right.
They basically had to get you to verbally admit that you were going to engage in sex act for this amount of money. And escorts would show up and just refuse to have that conversation. If the man couldn't put down the fee and just sit back and relax, the girl was out the door. But, the narrative has changed to where they want everyone to think that every ad is a prostitute. And think about it, 20, 30 years ago, the word escort kind of meant courtesan. It was something classy.
Right.
And now you say escort and you might as well say prostitute. And even before one of Backpage's first lawsuits, before the third section kept coming up, I forget what state it was, but it was a federal judge that said, wait a minute, it might even have been Craigslist. He says, you can't claim every adult ad is illegal. There's a lot of adult entertainers that are totally legitimate.
Right.
We got cam workers, we got strippers, porn people, dominatrix. So he says, you can't just claim all the ads are prostitutes. And law enforcement needs to do their job and find out who is who.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take you back to what happened before FOSTA. Congress formed a subcommittee and subpoenaed Backpage's CEOs. This power had not been used since the Cold Wars.
Wow.
And they get them in there and they lie about them knowingly facilitating child sex trafficking. But Backpage produced many letters from the FBI and law enforcement around the country saying, thank you, Backpage, for your cooperation and helping us locate a minor and catching a bad guy. Because they were reporting about 400 ads a week to the authorities. They were trying to cooperate. But the government does not want to cooperate with the adult industry. They want to exterminate us like we were cockroaches from the face of the earth, which is totally unreasonable. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So over the last week, a lot of people are scared. They don't really understand what the law means. They think that if they're an online escort, that they're somehow at a higher risk than they were last week. I've personally received 46 phone calls, 8 of them in Rhode Island this week, and people are really scared. The language, from what I understand, is if you knowingly allow someone to publish an ad and knowingly know it's sex trafficking or prostitution. Well, knowingly means that you either moderate or modify the ads like Backpage used to do to keep things clean, right? But see, I think the reason Backpage hasn't gone down, and if you look at it, there's more ads on Backpage than before FOSTA. So it's kind of like, ha, 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 Congress.
Right.
And this is just my personal opinion. I've not spoken to anyone at Backpage, and I'm not an attorney. But before FOSTA hit, they closed the adult section like Craigslist. They knew we know the ads are going to move to the personals, but they changed it where you could only put a picture, a phone number, your age, and a social media link. So there's nothing to moderate or modify anymore.
Right.
So how can they now say that they knowingly have knowledge of anything?
It could be just an individual looking for a date.
Right, exactly. And actually, I couldn't believe this guy on Facebook today that was like, well, you know what? Good for FOSTA. He didn't even realize that Craigslist had shut down their personals. But he was like, because, I'm on Craigslist and, most of them, they're just fake ads. And I said, so they're fake ads because they don't want to have sex with you for free, right? So they're not real people. They're fake. And listen, dude, if this happens to Craigslist, you don't think if they shut down Backpage, we're not going to go on I Love Cupid, Plenty of Fish, and Tinder, and heck, I might even try ChristianMingle.com, okay? So what are we going to do? We're going to shut down all the dating sites, and we're going to be back to the nightclub days. And but another thing we're seeing happening now, WordPress is going to start closing any websites in the United States that have adult content. We're seeing Google Drive. A lot of cam workers have. One of the things I love about the internet is a lot of porn performers weren't treated well by big porn companies. The porn companies made the money. They kind of, talked the girls into doing things they didn't want to do because if you don't do it, no one will hire you again. And the internet allowed them to work on sites like Chatterbait. And also they could make their own little porn clips and resell them over and over again. So they were in control of their own content. It's perfectly legal. Well, Google Drive is now shutting them down. And they can't download. They go to open one of their files, and it's just not there, or it won't open anymore.
Right.
And I imagine if you have 5 or 10 years worth of content on there, that's pretty damning to you. So I was worried about Coyote's site. We have no ads, no forums, no reviews. Mm-hmm. We simply post resources and article links to educate the public. There's no nude pictures. But we don't know, just because we're talking about sex work, whether we'll be shut down. So many people are moving their websites out of the country. Mm-hmm. I really think the people that are at risk are people that own the sites that are running escort ads reviews, and actually have forums where people are openly discussing it and like, hey, do you know this guy? And, they can't say that that's not facilitating in some sense. But what's really sad is, we found out that I think about 2% of the sex industry are victims, and the majority of them are domestic sex trafficking victims only because they're under 18. So the fact that the government wants to put 98% of the population at risk, I already have like 140 times higher risk of being murdered than anyone else in the general public.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to care. Scott Cunning did a great research project when Craigslist first hit, and he found out that female homicide rates went down 17%, and he excluded ones that were domestic violence. He was talking about people on Craigslist, dating sites, escorts. He also did another research project under decriminalization in Rhode Island from 2003 to 2009. Gonorrhea went down 40% and rape went down 30% for the entire state. These are good things.
Right.
But government is so gun-ho and shutting us down. They want to shut down porn. They want to shut down strip club. They want to, they want to control our sexuality.
Right.
So I'm going to need to let you talk.
No, I was just going to say you've got, done a lot of research, and obviously I've spent hours over the last couple of years, but particularly in the last couple of months, hours upon hours talking to folks in the community. One of the key safety factors for folks who were involved in escorting was the ability to vet their clients, to have them verify whether it be a place of employment. There were in any free market economy, websites that sprung up. What is it, 411, as well as other sites, which allowed folks in the sex worker community to, quite frankly, do a smell test on people so that they could make their own decisions. And this is what's important about being an American. You're supposed to be able to make your own decisions about what type of mutual consensual activity that you want to participate in as a business person. The right to association is fundamental in this country. So now all of a sudden, those sites are in danger, if in the short term at least, until this whole situation sorts itself out. So a process that's, or an industry, if you will, that's existed since the dawn of man, now is markedly less safe for the individuals who are choosing of their own free will and volition to participate in it. And I'm talking both sides of the equation, because quite frankly, the both sides, if they wanted to engage in a way of vetting the other partner, could do so. That's been shut down, and now, quite frankly, even let's take it to the logical extreme. The government is so hell bent on control that even organizations like this, the coalition, which are going to continue to spend an exhaustive amount of time looking at situations where government prohibition puts people in harm's way, can now be construed as facilitators. I mean, that's lunacy.
Exactly.
We have
what happened to free speech, right? Free thought.
I mean, they're so hell bent hell bent on control, and this is what I find ironic about the current administration. This administration that's in power now, and as you know, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. Draped itself in the American flag and the Constitution and liberty, lots of screaming eagles, if you will, on people's Facebook pages, and you'll rip this Constitution away from my cold dead hands. You know the pathology of it. All these people, quite frankly, have done more in the last year to fundamentally endanger civil liberties than perhaps the prior 20 years, including an administration that they purport to loathe because of that administration's disregard for the Constitution. The ironies are just disgusting. We see this current administration and this current Attorney General trading away fundamental civil rights, fundamental civil liberties, like it's a card game.
And what's really ironic about this? So now we have a law that Backpage or any other website can, get 25 years in federal prison and be sued civilly over an escort ad. Mm-hmm. But you can buy guns on those same sites and go do school shootings. And I'm not against guns. I think Part of me worries that some of the hysteria will lead to where they want to de-arm all Americans and the government will be the only ones with guns like Chile. But, I can agree that maybe you don't need a gun that shoots 3,000 bullets a minute. I don't think that we should make the age limit 21 because in a lot of places when you're 13 or 14, dad buys you a rifle and teaches you to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can see, I do believe that the students that are scared should have a right to speak about what they feel and think. But I don't think that, just banning it and criminalizing, that's all going to make it go away.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see is most of these people doing these mass shootings are these crazy white extremist men. And they're never labeled as domestic terrorism. But by golly, if they had dark skin or they were Muslim, there'd be a whole different headline on that, okay?
No, exactly. The problem I have is that, and by the way, let me just take a brief break here. Folks, if you're just joining us, we are the Coalition, loud and proud. And as always, you can tell clearly on tonight's show and prior weeks, we are outrage porn free. Hosting for the first time in our new form, our new video-based Coalition 2.0 is Belle Robinson. She's a long-term sex workers' rights advocate. She runs the local chapter of Coyote, Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. And the website, I believe, is coyoteri.org, where not only does she preach civil liberties, but is actively engaged with the academic community at Brown University and doing some pretty hardcore research into, I'll call it myth busting, the realities of ages, the economics, the econometrics, if you will, of the sex worker industry, puncturing myths and attempting to bring a sense of reality to a group of political leaders who clearly have no desire to engage in said reality. Folks, again, coalitionradio.us. There's a link at coalitionradio.us to our Facebook page where this and all other shows will live forever. We ask you if you could take a moment this week, if you're watching a video of ours, take a moment and subscribe to our page. Bella, thank you for subscribing to our page. We face challenges in independent media and getting the word out amongst the white noise that are unimaginable. On YouTube, it would appear that they're far more interested in having makeup blogs, NFL clips, and zip-popping sites than they would in fostering any sort of politically charged indie media on a hyper-local level. They claim to go after the high ground, but I don't know, yikes. So we'd appreciate your help in that. Bella, it's just control. I've mentioned, I love your reaction to this, I mentioned it over the past few weeks. There's a term called the patriarchy, which is, I actually embrace, and it's funny because some of my conservative Republican friends lose their bleep when you mention the patriarchy. Maybe because they want to be part of it, but they aren't. But the challenge here is in the popular culture now that women embrace sexuality much more independently, much more freely than ever, and by and large have eliminated a lot of the shame from their sexuality.
If it's free sex.
And you spoke quite eloquently about how with the advent of the internet, there's an independence on a business level. I mean, this is not unlike what happened to rock and roll when iTunes came around. All of a sudden, a handful of players no longer control the dissemination of rock and roll or any music or any theatrical works. And with the advent of the internet, you no longer have control by, I'll call it a new millennium version of the old MGM style studios, where you talk about slavery. I mean, I'm using this term loosely here, but individuals signed to long-term contracts with at low pay, low residuals, the likes of which you haven't seen since the 40s. Now, at the advent of the internet, individuals, men and women, are able to control their own entertainment destiny, if you will. And that is the first victim, if you will, of FOSTA and SESTA, because it's clear that they don't want any part of that, do they? They don't want.
And this is another thing I like to factor in. I go to a lot of local child exploitation trainings, and it's very triggering to listen to all their just fake stuff. But, in Rhode Island, Day One gets up and says, the pimps wait down the road from the foster homes, and these girls just want love. But they don't want to talk about when we found out 2016 that we had 320 unlicensed foster homes. And when teenagers report sexual abuse, they're looked at like they're just ungovernable and don't want to follow the rules. It's kind of like a sex worker. You can't rape them. You're lying. You're making it up. You're just angry. And, you know, so none of these people want to talk about economic inequality, lack of affordable housing, lack of jobs that pay a living wage, lack of safety nets. And I admit there is, you know, so many sex workers that are engaged in survival sex, especially LGBT youth. But how many people work at Walmart because they got to pay the rent? You're at work right now because you like to pay your mortgage, right, Pat?
I try
If you
to.
didn't come to work, you'd be thrown out on the street. So in a sense, we're all exploited, and just surviving day to day is costing us more and more than it ever did before. We have
Right.
less and less free time. So another thing they like to do is they never want to compare sex work to anyone else. So I like to compare it to Walmart. Like, how many Walmart workers are sexually abused as children, and how many Walmart workers are on drugs?
Right.
Because they like to add other layers of stigma. But in a sense, it's really not society's fault. I'm going to tell you why. I recently read a report that was done out in California. I can't remember how many people. I know it was over 100 that were in the sample. But they let these people read two stories. One was a sexual assault on an average woman, and one was a sexual assault on a sex worker. And society has been conditioned to have less empathy for people engaged in the sex industry than they are ordinary women.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? You know what's happened since then? When we played into this game that bad women get what they deserve, you know what we see happening now? Now cops are raping all kinds of women at traffic stops. You don't have to be a sex worker for it to happen to you. We know they'll target sex workers, women of color, people who use drugs, people from poor neighborhoods, because it's easy to discredit them.
Right.
But we're starting to see that fallout. Meanwhile, we don't want to teach our kids about sexual ed in schools because of the religious people. And there's no conversations about what consent looks like, because in my generation, we didn't have college kids pulling girls behind dumpsters, raping them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I also want to point out that last year it was 2 million, but now we have 3 million college students that have accounts on seekingarrangement.com looking for sugar daddies because of they don't want to end up $50,000 or $100,000 in debt and come out with a master's degree, and then they can't even get a job. And if they do get a job, and then when we talk about state regulations, I forget what state it was, but I was reading that this nurse had to take time off because she was sick with cancer. She got behind on her student loans, and they pulled her nursing license by the state. So now she can't go back to work to pay.
Right.
It's kind of like the hair braiding thing. I mean, so in Seattle, they made strippers register. And once you register, that information is public, and anyone that files a public records request can get your real name, your address, your picture, everything. And some crazy man filed a Freedom of Information Act for 30 strippers and told the judge he just wanted to pray for the women by name. And the judge gave him an injunction. He goes, dude, what happens when you leave this list at Dunkin' Donuts? And my whole thought was, why are these women forced to register? I'm pretty sure they didn't get a safety class on how to give a safe lap dance.
Right.
So it's a form of discrimination. In New Orleans, we're seeing raids on strip clubs, and they're trying to permanently revoke liquor licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And the mayor's wife runs a trafficking NGO. And then also on top of that, if I lose my liquor license and I can't make any money from the building, I'm going to have to sell it. And then what happens next? Gentrification comes to town.
Right.
And it pushes all the poor people out. So these are all, what I see this is very similar is when we look at the systems of systematic racism. And a lot of what we learn in school prior to college is a whitewashing. I remember in school, they barely talked about segregation. They certainly didn't tell us that people of color were pushed into poor neighborhoods with no opportunities, no way to borrow money for housing or opening businesses. We weren't taught that we kidnapped 100,000 American Native children and then kicked them out of the institutes when they were 18.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a white person for a long time, I didn't kind of understand that. But now we're seeing these other systems that are very similar. They're going to affect a lot more populations. I read in 2017, 82% of all the wealth created in the United States went to the top 1%. Well, we're going to get to the point where they just can't squeeze any more blood out of the stone.
Right.
People are getting poorer and poorer. It causes more domestic violence. It causes probably good people to go start robbing and doing things, and because not everyone can be a sex worker. I'm just so grateful I'm a female and can be.
Right.
And I have a great love for people that work hard and can barely make it or become homeless. I grew up thinking homeless people were all alcoholics and deserved it. And now I'm not so dumb, and I understand it could happen to any one of us.
Right.
So I see connections between we need to stand up for undocumented people, people of color, homeless people, all different types of marginalized communities, and because all these things connect with sex work. And I think if we all stand up together as far as the social justice movement, we become a lot stronger.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a thing called white feminism. And we've seen white feminism in the 70s where they locked out the voices of poor women of color.
Mm-hmm.
Me Too was started by a woman of color to highlight people like maids and waitresses. See, if I'm a waitress and I complain to my boss that all these guys are harassing me, how long am I going to work at Waffle House? But it became all about Hollywood and privileged women who had HR departments that never reported it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you my real resentment with Hollywood. Hollywood has been engaging in prostitution at a cortisone level for decades.
Mm-hmm.
The casting couch, these women have already been in films. They didn't need that one role. They weren't going to become homeless or destitute over it. Mm-hmm. They chose to do it to get the part, and now they want to go cry about it. But when Amnesty International came out with their policy suggesting that globally we decriminalize prostitution to ensure the human rights of sex workers, Hollywood was the first ones to come out and shit all over that.
No,
sorry about that word.
No, it's okay.
Crap all over that.
We're not on the radio anymore. You've got to keep it a little good. But no, you're absolutely right. Because what I found fascinating was right around the time Me Too broke into Hollywood, the She Knew movement all of a sudden blew up out of nowhere, particularly with regard to Meryl Streep, and because she knew, and that was all of a sudden the smackdown was put on that because white, entitled, rich feminists, first and second wave feminists, wanted no part of either the LGBTQ community or any of the marginalized folks who found themselves, who didn't quite meet the litmus test. They didn't go to the right liberal arts colleges. They didn't come from the right neighborhoods. They didn't fit. They actually were folks who had legitimately encountered marginalization and discrimination on 3 or 4 different levels, not just their sexuality, but race, religion, economics. I mean, just every step along the line. And yet you would think that white, wealthy feminists would reach out to the most marginalized community based on their rhetoric, when in fact they're a sham. It's a phase for some of these folks, as opposed to the gritty realities of life.
And to take it one step further, this one really got my goat. I can't remember his name. He was the Indian actor. He has a date with a woman. They go back to his house to have wine. Now, when you go back to a man's house, you know he's going to try to have sex.
Right.
She didn't tell him no. She told him to slow down. And when he tried again, she went and blogged about him. And I heard at the awards, no one clapped for him. And he's just, if anything, it was an awkward, kind of awkward attempt. But, it's different when a woman says no. Slow down means I'm willing to negotiate. I want you to say you love me, commit to a relationship. There's something I want from you first. Right. Okay? And I thought that was horrible that no one stood up for that guy. And where do we draw the line? And I would never, ever want to say to a rape victim, I know very few rape victim people lie about rape. I think it's like 1% but that 1% gets the other 9 called liars. And I've even heard law enforcement say they don't think rape should be illegal because they believe it's consensual sex. But I want to talk about violence on women in general. So I come to the conclusion that the government doesn't care about violence on women. Because if you have some crazy domestic violent guy trying to kill you, mm-hmm. they give you a piece of paper called a protective order, order, and then they dump you in a shelter where with your two kids where you can never afford to leave that shelter, so you go back to your abuser. We have 500,000 untested rape kits in evidence loggers because they claim they can't afford to test them, but we can afford military tanks for the place, right? Mm-hmm. Not testing rape kits.
Right.
I've always wondered why the rape kit goes to the police. Why doesn't it go from the hospital to the lab and the results would be sent to the police and the prosecutor? And I think it was Detroit a couple of years ago, they tested 10,000 rape kits and they found 100 serial rapists, and one man had raped women in 21 states. Now I want to compare this. That was that case about a year or two ago in Boston, outside of Boston, where the girl was from Yale. She was home visiting family, went on a jog. She was raped and murdered, and they got the DNA and even formed a picture what the man would look like. Mm-hmm. Think about all the resources that went into that.
Right.
But when there was over a dozen escorts murdered and left on the beach up on Gilgo Beach on Long Island, they didn't even look for anybody. They didn't even investigate. So, it goes back to that bad women get what they deserve. Part of this whole thing really, another part that really makes me angry is I'm all for saving the children. I don't think minors belong in the sex industry. I don't think they should be in trouble for it. But Urban Justice did a great research where they interviewed 1,000 youths in 6 cities between 13 and 24. And 96% of these kids said, we don't have pimps and market facilitators. We teach each other how to find clients and avoid the cops and the social workers because the state has created so many barriers. We can't access shelter or any other service. Mm-hmm. Wow. So rather than, if we didn't pump all this money into the trafficking NGOs to give a bunch of privileged people jobs to run around and chase street women and, or like Swanee Hump, who's been giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to prosecutors all over the country to go do John stings and arrest clients. See, here's the next one. Then, like in Seattle, they can charge you $900 to go to John school where they shame you for 10 hours, and that $900 is split between the NGO and law enforcement to go do it again. So this is a huge expansion of the criminal justice system. And another big faker is diversion court and diversion programs. Mm-hmm. So New York has a trafficking court. I like to call it something different. I won't say on the air. But they don't ask you if you're a victim. And there was a woman, Miss Love, who used to be a street-based worker. She got beat up real bad. She quit doing sex work. She was in school to be a surgical nurse. And one of the cops that knew her screamed across the street trying to solicit her. And she said, "No, thank you, officer," and walked out of the subway. And they surrounded her, arrested her. She's in trafficking court. The judge and the prosecutor and her public defender are all trying to pressure her to plead guilty. And Miss Love is like, I didn't do it this time, and I ain't pleading guilty. And not only did she win at trial, she got paid $15,000, which isn't much, from the city of New York for the false arrest. Now, this is like drug court where you're going to go back every week. Right. And Urban Justice also interviewed 1,400 women that had been drugged through this court within a couple of years. And the only thing they were offered was free yoga class that will make all your trauma go away, counseling, and some immigration services, but none of the services they need. Like, none of these people are going to pay our rent, feed our kids, put our gas in our car, pay our cell phone bills or car insurance or anything else we need. What they want to do is dump us in shelters like Crossroads, especially General House, where they leave us with no resources and we can never get out because they want to control us to make sure we don't go back to the sex industry. Our survey showed that over 70% had worked doing sex work and a regular job at the same time, and 82% returned to the sex industry because jobs didn't pay a living wage. The most damning thing the trafficking narrative is doing to these people that are getting screwed over by the trafficking NGOs is they're isolating them from other sex workers in their community who are more empowered that might want to help them. Because if someone wants to exit, we want to help them do that. We want it to be their choice what they want. Mm-hmm. It is in any victim, you ask a victim what you want. If you're raped, I can go to the hospital, get a rape kit, get medical attention, and say, I don't want to involve the police, and I don't want to go to court. I just want to forget about it. If I'm a domestic violence victim, no one forces me to go to court and testify against my husband. Or my abuser. I can say, no, I don't want to do that. So what they're doing is they're stealing the agency of people that are victims, and they're trying to make people think that there's only pimps and traffickers and victims, and no one in between. And they're totally erasing all the people involved in the sex community. And I can say this, people involved in the sex community, sex workers and clients, they're awesome people. We have a great bond, almost like people that have gone through traumatic things, war and college and things together. And we spend a lot of money in local communities. And I know personally, I give a lot of my time to my local community and organizing. Mm-hmm. So real quickly, I want to mention the Amora Network. The Amora Network was formed. It's got core organizations like FANG, Prison's Youth Group, Direct Action, Refugee Dream Center. But it was great that they invited Coyote to be one of the core organizations. So the idea is to set up a network that would support people at risk of deportation, victims of hate crimes, victims of hate abuse, and they acknowledge that violence towards sex workers are hate crimes. So I go to these meetings every week, and we saw what a couple months ago when Lillian was picked up by ICE and shipped off, and it was beautiful. Our community came together. They raised $10,000. We got her an attorney. We got her back home. Her and her husband came to Amora's launch party when we launched the 24-hour hotline support line, and it was really beautiful to see our community do that. Mm-hmm. What I'm hoping is the next time they do this to an undocumented sex worker, or that the community rallies around them.
Right. But let me ask you a question. If you find yourself, you're a young woman or young man or young trans, and you find yourself, for example, engaged in survival sex, and it's a subject we've covered in great deal, and it's and if you want to talk about an issue that makes suburban America uncomfortable, talk to them about survivor sex. So if you haven't listened to the show before, and feel free to correct me, but survivor sex ultimately is very often individuals who are a great challenge financially, often are homeless, and engage in sex for commerce, literally in very often cases, the place that they engage in the sexual act will be the only place that they have that's warm and dry and a place
the place to stay, something to eat.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So
you're absolutely right.
All right. So if let's just say you're in a northern Rhode Island town, you're engaged in survival sex, you're at risk, it doesn't matter what the underlying reason is. Ultimately, that should never matter. You have an individual, a human being who's in a situation. Who should they call, and what services, if any, are available to that young man, that young woman, that young trans who is in that situation? What do they do?
Services are very limited. If it's local and they call Coyote, we will do our best to try to find them a shelter. Swap Behind Bars does the same thing. But you got to think about this. If the government cared about sex trafficking victims, then why don't they care about homeless people who become sex trafficking victims? And let's look at this. The more broke you are, the easier it is for someone to control and exploit you when you're out in the street, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. I already paid my May's rent, because when you're broke, it's really easy to take that bad client or that date you had that feeling about. Mm-hmm. But when you have a little bit of cash and you're stable, you're able to be more pickier about those things. So I kind of have a saying that if anyone was cold and hungry enough, we could be convinced to turn a trick for a blanket or a burger, mm-hmm. right? And if we want to stop people from being exploited and help lift them out of poverty, we will stop trying to police the adults, and we will start providing support services to the population. I think all the shelters in Rhode Island only share about $1 million a year. But Sojourner House has a budget of $1.7 million because, see, they tapped into the $200,000 tip grant open traffic shelter. That was after I volunteered with them for about 10 months. And they didn't want to hear anything about sex workers. And it's basically an apartment with 4 beds. They rounded up 4 street-based workers to dump them in there with no services. And I was taking a class to do HIV testing certification, and I met their new coordinator. And she says, Bella, I'm concerned because, the women are still going out to the streets to make money. And I'm scared for their safety. And I said, I'd be glad to come down and give a safety and screening workshop, because even on the street, there are certain things you can do to increase your safety. And I emailed them. Their residential director says, well, I don't know, Bella, because some of the women have been traumatized. Well, no one's suggesting that we force them to listen to what I have to say. But things like working in pairs, writing down tag numbers, little things like that can lead to more safety, not total safety.
Mm-hmm.
But what do they expect is going to happen to these women after a year? How are they? And think about this, the few times that a trafficking NGO says, oh, she's an ex-prostitute, trafficking victim, and now she has a wonderful life. No one explains how she's no longer living in poverty and how she can all of a sudden pay her rent.
Right.
She didn't go get a master's degree. No one gave her a good job. Okay. So those are the things that they that never want to talk about, so they can keep pushing their agenda. And I know a lot of people have different opinions about helping the poor. But then the visibly poorer target, we have the panhandling legislation and the police harassing homeless people. I've done some work with House of Hope, goes out and does outreach to find out from the homeless population what the police are doing. And we've confirmed from two street-based workers that the police are taking them behind abandoned buildings in Providence and forcing them to have sex under threat of arrest. I tracked 50 prostitution cases from July and August of 2017. The majority of these women are chronically homeless, and many have been on the housing wait list a long time, and the judge is fining them $466 every time they come to court. And some of these women had been arrested 20 or 30 times since the mid-90s.
Right.
And none of all these nonprofits are raking in the money and running around saying, we're going to save you, you can be like us. What they do is they find one person, get them an apartment, buy them, get some stuff from Christmas, and they make a big news article of it, but they don't tell you about the thousands and thousands of other ones they didn't help. It's kind of like throwing pennies at veterans or homeless people or cancer patients. And most NGOs are spending 80% of their money on their own salaries and fundraising. Mm-hmm. There is no government transparency as far as how much money do we give you, exactly what services did you give out, and for us to evaluate whether that money is being spent wisely, even though a lot of this is state and federal funding. Well, I, for one, am kind of pissed off my tax dollars are being spent like this. And while a lot of people like to claim that sex workers don't pay taxes, a lot of us do. And even homeless people spend 7 cents every time they spend $1. Isn't that pitiful? Should there be an exemption at that?
Yeah.
So it's really about wanting to keep people in poverty so they can't rise up, because then they might demand more from their employers or other opportunities. Mm-hmm. So we try to. Another thing that we do is we get calls from sex workers when they're arrested. Mm-hmm. They'll go to another town to work as an escort. They get arrested in a sting. The police take their money, their phones. They're locked in their hotel room. The police release them from jail. It's getting dark. They're not even from that city. So, a lot of times we're able to put them in a hotel for a day or two, or email them a $25 Domino's card because they get something to eat. And while we can't do that long term, because if you want to help sex workers, there's no funding for that. But if you want to crap all over them and stigmatize them, the government will just rain down money at you.
Well, let me ask you a critical question. We've only got a couple minutes left. You, as someone who is in the community, you've been very political for a number of years. You've done a great deal of research. What's unique about your situation in Rhode Island is that outside of a few select counties in Las Vegas, and actually, let's think about this out loud. Your situation is unique across America because you lived in Rhode Island and were political at a time when, through accident of justice, if you will, most sex work was decriminalized.
Indoor sex work was decriminalized, and it wasn't an accident. What happened is Margot St. James filed a constitutional challenge and she sued Providence Police.
Right.
But you're right. I moved here. I felt free for the first time in my life because you can't threaten me. I can dial 911 and tell on you. I can't be evicted. Mm-hmm. It was empowering. Right. And after they took it away 6 months later, it really pissed me off because I had a taste of that freedom. Right. And we know in New Zealand, when they decriminalized in 2003, they just about rid the industry of exploitation. And I think they've only had one sex trafficking case since 2003. But labor trafficking has increased. So that's a fake stat that they'll throw out, well, trafficking's increased in New Zealand, but when you look, it's labor trafficking and not sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. A brothel worker was able to sue a brothel manager for sexual harassment. She was awarded $25,000. A street-based worker called the cops when the guy wouldn't pay her. And they said, son, you're going to get $100 out of the ATM and pay her, or you're going to go to jail for theft, just like if you stole a pizza. So we can start to see when we have labor rights and we frame them that way, and we have access to equal protection under the law, our working conditions get better, our safety becomes better, and that also has to be provided support services for our youth and people that are really destitute.
Right. I mean, it's ironic that, and thank God they finally, repassed the law. If you're involved in if someone is, and they call it Good Samaritan laws, if someone overdoses on drugs, and here we are in the opioid epidemic, and someone who is on probation or is otherwise might be construed as being engaged in similar criminal activity, they're given an exemption in order to help that person find medical care that they so desperately need. In some cases, it's
You know what we did? We didn't renew that law in Rhode Island a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And now there's a law called Kristen's Law, where if you OD and sold someone drugs, they want to give you life in prison, not just manslaughter. So that means no one's going to dial 911 to save a life. Everyone's just going to flee and leave you there to die.
Right. So now that doesn't exist in the case for sex workers protection when someone might be in a very difficult situation health-wise. But the real question I've got for you is, a couple of years ago there were people, and they're very self-congratulatory, that they, despite testimony at the time, very provocative testimony by people who are involved in the sex community, they essentially recriminalized it. They quote unquote, in their term, not mine, they fixed the law. Is life better or worse post recriminalization?
It's worse. And I'll give you another example.
Mm-hmm.
The Nordic model that criminalizes the clients.
Mm-hmm.
In France, they passed that a year ago. No, I think it's the UK. But anyway, they have a blacklist site called Ugly Mugs where, you can blacklist violent guys or guys that did something to you. And violence has gone up 54% in 1 year, even though the women aren't criminalized. Because criminalizing the clients, not only is it unconstitutional because it's gender-based, you can't just criminalize the men and not the women, but it also still criminalizes everything around you. The police stalk your in-call, they try to harass the guys when you leave, you're still scared if you go to law enforcement. I've heard police officers say, well, we shouldn't help them if they report crimes because they're engaging in something that's illegal or wrong. But think about if you're a realtor and I show you a house and I'm sexually assaulted, no one blames me for being alone when I showed you that house.
Right.
So it's all these layers of stingers and victim blaming. Globally, sex workers report the majority of the violence comes from the hands of the police. Police officers beat their wives at double the rate any other professional. If you go to police, prostitution, and politics, you can see thousands of U.S. cops that have been convicted of sexually assaulting children, many cases young children. They'll get 3 years in prison, probation, where they're not made to be a sex offender, they're not decertified, they can move to another state and become a cop again. And these are the men that we're sending after vulnerable street women or online escorts to rescue them. And a lot of them are predators themselves. And then you get the cops off duty with their badges threatening, sex workers for free sex under threat of arrest. We saw with Celeste Gabe out in California, where the 30 Oakland cops exploited her starting at age 17. And then they flew her to Florida, do a rehab, and when she bit a rehab worker, they threw her in jail with a $300,000 bond, and was actually swamped behind bars and Coyote and a few other organizations that we thought they were going to murder that girl in jail. We got her out, got her attorney. She was back in California in 10 days. 7 cops were indicted. The city of Oakland paid her $1 million settled. And then the cops had a secret award ceremony that the media was locked out of. And as soon as they paid her off, magically all those charges were dropped. And you know what's funny? That is the same county that Camelia Harris, who had Backpage's CEO arrested to win her Senate seat to grandstand, who might be presidential candidate 2020, and not a word out of her mouth about this victim. What we're seeing, I'll end this up, is a huge increase of 17, 18, and 19-year-old people being charged with sex trafficking. Because when you're 16 or 17, you're both a victim. When it turns 18 and you become the sex trafficker, and these kids are getting long prison sentences. And The only one that's trying to do anything to help mitigate their sentences, support them when incarcerated, are other sex workers. The trafficking NGOs don't care if they can't pimp you out at a fundraiser.
Wow. We gotta. Wow.
But I really appreciate that you've been having a lot of great people on your show, that you're having many conversations.
Mhm.
I love to see it keep going.
No, we're gonna, as long as you've got a couple of different situations that as a show we'll continue to focus on. Number one, and clearly the war on drugs, which is, unfortunately sort of the poster child and the model for the war on sex workers. They're using the same techniques, whether it be civil asset forfeiture, shaming, workplace discrimination that takes place as a result of being incarcerated for what is a consensual act. I mean, it's almost like they got the playbook down on the war on drugs, and they're actually exporting that now into sex work. You've got this enabling legislation like FOSTA and SESTA, which is now going to be used as a tool. As long as these situations exist, as long as there are challenges against folks' individual civil liberties, the big two for me are free speech, First Amendment, and Fourth Amendment. I support the Second Amendment wholeheartedly, but to me, as a show, we focus on the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, protection against illegal search and seizure. As long as you have an institutional support by government for the violation of those two fundamental principles of human civil liberty, screw the Constitution for tonight's purposes. We're talking about rights endowed to you simply by your existence. And this show will continue to obsessively focus on them and call bull bleep on everybody and anybody, whether it be Kamala Harris, whether it be the Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney from Long Island, whether it be Jeff Sessions, the Trump administration, whether it be locally with the government Rhode Island government that's set up, a DNA database. They've set up a warrantless search of the prescription medical database, whether you've got an attorney general who is complicit in the type of crackdowns on people's civil rights, whether, in the form of the type of investigations they do on sex workers. As long as that exists and this show somehow manages to keep the doors open, we are going to obsess over that.
Did you hear about the cloud bill they snuck in the budget?
I brought that up at the beginning of the show. Actually, yeah. I had the fortune today of being on the Lively Experiment, and my outrage of the week was the passage of SESTA and the passage of the cloud bill.
I'll watch the YouTube later then to catch that punt. But it's great talking to you, Pat. Yep. Free to talk any other time you want. Yep. I'm glad you're having other people come in, and thank you so much for having us and help lifting our voices up. I really appreciate it.
All right, how can folks find you on the web?
They can find me at they can email me at bella@coyoteri.org. They can find me on Facebook under Bella Robinson or the Coyote Group, or they can find our website at coyoteri.org.
Super. Bella Robinson, someone who clearly takes it, as we like to say, very, very personally. She's been righteously fighting this battle well before the abominations called FOSTA and SESTA and Cloud, and someone who's obviously his life work is committed towards just trying to do the right thing for people. Bella, congratulations on your work, your work with Brown, and like I said, we'll just continue on this until maybe one day we can just figure out a way to fix it all.
There we go. Thank you, Pat.
All right, buddy.
Good night, everyone.
Folks, again, as always, we ran over, but we are, in fact, the Coalition, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center at 90 Way Boston Street in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. Tonight we told a few. We focused on issues that are the centerpiece of our efforts to make Rhode Island a better place for all, including the most marginalized amongst us. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course, CoalitionRadio.us, where this show and all other shows will live in perpetuity through a simple link to our YouTube page. Folks, if you have a moment and you listen to the show now or sometime in the future, please go to our YouTube page and subscribe. Help us spread the message. Help a small player in independent media maintain and grow its voice so that Rhode Island and the nation at large can be a better place for all of us. Folks, we'll be back next week. Take it personally.